Welcome to Moving Forward, conversations on culture, identity, healing, and hope. I'm your host, Linda Anderson, and I created this podcast as a space for real, heartfelt conversations with people who are reflecting, evolving, and boldly stepping into what's next. This podcast was born out of my own journey through seasons of loss, transition, and transformation, and my belief that healing happens when we come together to share our stories. My hope is that these conversations will inspire you to pause, reflect, and find courage as you move forward in your own life. Today's conversation reminds us that leadership doesn't wait for titles, degrees, or permission. Sometimes it begins with noticing what others overlook and choosing to tell the truth through story. My guest today is Emma Wang, a senior in high school and a filmmaker deeply committed to social justice. Though she currently lives in Taiwan, Emma's work is focused on youth homelessness in California, an issue that is often discussed in statistics, but far less often through the voices of young people themselves. Emma created a short documentary that explores youth homelessness through interviews with county officials, educators, and individuals who have experienced homelessness. Her goal is not just awareness, but understanding of the systems that create vulnerability and the community efforts working to support young people who are too often invisible. This conversation is about youth voice, ethical storytelling, global perspective, and what it means to move forward with courage, humility, and purpose, even when the work is hard and the answers are incomplete. So Emma, I thank you so much for being here. I know it's 8:30.
Yeah, it's okay. Thank you for your invitation.
Yeah, I'm
I feel
looking
really
forward.
honored to be on the podcast. So this is my
Okay.
first time officially being on a podcast.
Oh, that's great to hear. Well, we
Yeah,
are so thankful for having you. And I was fortunate to work a little bit with you this summer when you were here in the
yeah,
United States. So thank you again, and we'll get started. And Emma, where I want to start with is really with you. What first drew you to filmmaking as a way to explore social justice issues?
yeah. So I've never really thought that I could do filmmaking that revolves around social justice. I always thought that I love narrative filmmaking and that is the definition of filmmaking. But then that changed around like 2020 when I began doing community service, supporting like low-income families and orphanages across Taiwan by providing food to them and also um, teaching them how to dance. And it really made me realize that these were real stories happening around us that people just don't see. And I just started to feel that filmmaking could be more than just purely as an entertainment, and it could be a medium that gives visibility to overlooked experiences that spread awareness on social issues. So, my experiences in helping marginalized communities inspired me to produce my first social justice documentary, which is called Homes We Don't See. And it focuses on children and families in Taiwan that don't have a stable living environment, and it also highlights the environments that they live in and the social workers' experiences too.
As you stated, I mean, you're living in Taiwan, you're a student in
Yeah,
Taiwan,
yeah,
but yet your documentary that we did focuses on youth homelessness in California. So
yes.
what led you to this particular issue here?
So, growing up, I have been transitioning from one place to the other. I have lived in Bay Area for several years, so probably during the period where COVID was still like really just happening, I was at San Francisco. I was really shocked by seeing just like a bunch of homelessness happening on the streets of San Francisco. And I still remember I even like see one person who just looks like he's too young to be homeless and looks like he should be at school. And so I asked my parents, why is this happening? And my parents would always told me that Oh, it's because that they choose to be homeless. They're doing drugs, and that's the core issue. And it is their choice that they probably escape from their homes or just like they choose to be homeless, right? And I was really intrigued. That has been a concern in the back of my mind for years, but I didn't really discover my interest in filmmaking during that time. So right until last summer, I just thought that this would be a really good idea for me to explore. And I actually did my research on it and I was just really intrigued by it. So I went to many instructors, many social workers, and I interviewed them, including Mrs. Anderson, about their experiences in guiding these kids in school or just um, sharing their experiences as a former homeless person. Yeah.
So when you have interviewed and talked to many different people on when people hear the phrase youth homelessness, what do you think they often misunderstand or fail to see?
I do think that stereotypes are really bad, and I think it is um sometimes it's inevitable. It's like a humanistic quality for us to just assume before we understand. And I think a lot of people would assume that homelessness is, like as I said, it was a choice, and they uh they probably messed up in their life. They had to like take responsibility for their actions and what have they done um to become homeless through drugs and just um or it's just their personal choice. But I think there's comes a lot of complexity to that because homelessness is not just people that you see on the streets. It could be people who are couch surfing, who sleep in their friends' houses, who sleep in the cars, but you just don't see them on the streets. Like there are still a lot of homelessness like happening in California, even though when I was there in Bay Area last summer, the homeless encampments are cleaned out
Mhm.
like way much more than I expected. So yeah, it's not just people that you think that lives on the streets. I think that's the most important part.
Right. So
Yeah.
you and you stated that you've researched, and I know you've conducted, interviews
Yeah.
so far. What has surprised you the most about the systems that are meant to support homeless youth?
So one of the most important and most surprising insights that um, I learned came from an interview with Mr. Gonzalez, whom I was introduced through Mrs. Anderson. And he experienced homelessness himself as a young person and spent years cycling in and out of the system, including being frequently arrested for drug use. But today he works as a peer specialist at Abode Services, supporting other homeless people who are going through what he once lived. And what really surprised me was that his perspective on shelters and low income housing. He
Mhm.
told me that on the surface, it seems like building more shelters should solve the problem of homelessness. But he explained that for many homeless youth, simply providing a bed isn't enough. And in some cases, it doesn't work at all. And many young people are dealing with PTSD, dealing with trauma, substance addiction, and serious like mental health issues. And being placed in shelters where others are struggling with the same issues would be very overstimulating, overwhelming, and they may feel unsafe in that living environment. And for some environment, they could also trigger relapse, and others may struggle to prioritize housing because when they got an addiction, they spent all of their money on substances. And so as a result, he stated that 80 to 90% of homeless people, including homeless youth, end up returning to the streets because not it's not because that they want to, it's because that they just feel more comfortable doing that. And so they don't have to face their traumas in a system like this. And that really challenged my assumptions because I always thought that counties are doing a great job building all of these services, shelters, and just buildings for those low income families. Wait, sorry, homeless people. And so, but I just figured that they aren't a long-term solution for everyone. It may be temporary, but it's not a long-term solution for every homeless youth, every homeless person. And so, yeah, ultimately, I was really shocked by what he said that homelessness can be fixed that easily. And I emphasized this specifically in my documentary.
And I know when you and I spoke, and even when you talked to James Gonzalez, who you're talking about right now, I know that with us and anybody, any other adult that you were reaching out to, though, you've been very intentional about
Yeah.
wanting to talk to voices of homeless teens themselves. Why
Yes.
is that so important to you?
So, obviously because this documentary is about homeless youth themselves. So I really wanted to include the voices of people my own age. And so from the beginning of the project, I interviewed educators and social workers, including Mrs. Anderson, right? And they offered valuable insights of how the system works and their experiences in working with these children. But I quickly realized that without hearing directly from the homeless youth themselves, it is something that is missing. And uh, I really wanted to understand their experiences through their first person narratives. And that includes like what the typical school day is like for them, how constant move affect their education, affect their work ethic, and how if whether if they face stigma in school or just in society. And those details are impossible to fully capture from a outside perspective, sorry. Yeah.
You mentioned the word ethics too, and ethical. That's my next question
Yeah.
is what ethical responsibilities do you feel as a filmmaker when telling these stories about people who are experiencing such vulnerability?
So, as a filmmaker, I understand that homelessness is a pretty sensitive topic out there. And especially for youth who has experienced it. So, for instance, when I was having trouble to find homeless youth last summer for my documentary because I was trying to find B-roll for my film because most of the clips that I got were just interviews from instructors and social workers. But uh even Mrs. Anderson helped us to ask former homeless student of hers. I still remember, but he declined the offer.
Mm.
So I actually understand that because um as a filmmaker, I feel the responsibility to put people's well-being over the film. And so I would, and for instance, is like whenever I interview someone, I would always talk to them before shooting so I know what things to avoid, like what sensitive topics to avoid.
And we all know, listeners that are hearing this and people all around, when we understand there is urgency to tell these stories and to get this out there so we can all help. But how do you balance the urgency to tell these stories, but with the need to protect dignity, safety, and trust?
So again, I feel the need. It is my responsibility to put someone's emotional well-being before my own project. And uh, this happened when I was still interviewing people last summer in Bay Area. I had the awesome opportunity to interview a former homeless mother for this project. So uh, we talked about it. We talked about what to include in the documentary, what I would ask them, so like they would know. And we were talking, right? And he asked for um her name to be hidden and for her name to be replaced by a fake name. So I would call her with her fake name. And that is for safety reasons because she was a domestic abuse survivor and who still lives in the shelter. So I think respecting boundaries is really important because you never know if this documentary goes out in public and if people that are related to his former abusive husband um views it and like the information gets spread around and it might be really unsafe for her and her children. So that is really important to just respect boundaries and talk through it before I interview someone.
I'd like to really emphasize we're talking to a teenager that's a senior in high school. Youth voice is so powerful to me.
Yes.
And it's very emotional to me because I totally believe in youth voice. And you are living outside the United States, living in Taiwan. So how does living outside the United States shape the way you see this issue and perhaps the way you are telling the story?
So, as I mentioned, even though there are homeless people everywhere that you could find,
Mhm.
um, it is not as big of an issue in Taiwan. So that contrast made me really be more aware of the differences between policies, infrastructure, and social safety nets that shape people's outcomes. And but however, after visiting low-income families and orphans across Taiwan, there I find similarities between two marginalized communities, despite being different countries, and especially in how instability, stigma, and lack of access really affect younger people's lives and affect their lives later in adulthood. So this understanding makes me approach this issue with context rather than assuming and having assumptions about homelessness.
Hmm. You are, again, your identity as a young person right now and a storyteller, but in what ways has this project really shaped your identity as a young person and as a storyteller, but and also, and you're going there as a future leader?
Yeah, so for me, I think this project pushed me to grow in three different roles at the same time. I think as a young person, it made me be more aware of my responsibility to notice and care about social issues and beyond my own experiences. So I don't really take things for granted. I learned to not take things for granted. I learned to be grateful for what I have right now. And I think that's really important. And as a storyteller, as a filmmaker, I learned that listening is just as important as filming, and that how you tell a story uh, really matters as much as the story itself. And as a future leader, the obstacles I have faced in this process have built me into a stronger person, more resilient person, and kept me going even when sometimes obstacles arise when I am editing, whenever I'm shooting, filming, and whenever the work feels incomplete.
Mm. You shared in a previous question answer
That's
conversation here that it was difficult finding opportunities to interview homeless youth. It's been challenging, but what have you learned though through that struggle?
so yeah, um taking you back to last summer again, I was the biggest issue for me is to look for these homeless youth. And I was really stressed because I know that I've reached out for help. I asked many of the interviewers I interviewed
Mhm.
um tips and advices, and like people like Mrs. Anderson also helped me reach out to people. And I'm really grateful for that. But I soon realized that homeless youth are constantly moving, and even social workers struggle to stay in contact, have their contact with them. And so I also took action by reaching out to nearly every homeless youth shelter in Bay Area, but the answer that they always gave me is that no, you can't film kids, and it's just not like it's against the policies there. And I also traveled to places like Fremont, Oakland to look for possible homeless youth, homeless teenagers on the street. We even asked the homeless adults there, and they all said that they don't know anyone who is young that is homeless on the streets. So that was really hard for me because I was battling um with time crunch, right? I was because I almost had to fly back to Taiwan because I had school. And but yes, I am glad that I realized that this is such a sensitive issue, and it is not always possible to be ethical and to have
Mm.
every um every everything that you could envision in a film. And so I the pressure really made me rethink how I could do my storytelling. So I realized that creativity does thrive under constraints because um I soon realized that I could actually ask the people that I know and reach out to art clubs, my school's art clubs members. They're amazing artists to help me, and I am so grateful that they did. They actually they wanted to collaborate with me and they created digital illustrations that visually represented the experiences being discussed. And those drawings ended up replacing the traditional B-roll that you see. And I think this is a way where you can make film ethical at the same time powerful.
Mhm. Yeah, I agree. And I wanted to let the listeners know that in the show notes is the link to the documentary that they'll be able to watch. So definitely that is shared right
Thank
now.
you.
So you've done all this work and what's keeping you going? What's keeping you moving forward? What kept you moving forward? Because you definitely ran into obstacles.
So, I had hope because I think that this message is so important. I think if it's not me who's conveying this message through film, I think no other younger person that I know of would do this project because I actually go to school where people actually live very well off. I go to a private elite international school, and I think that this issue is often overlooked. So the hope really comes from me really producing a film and really making this work, even when there is times that I don't think that this is gonna work, like, oh, I want to give up. But still, I really need to push myself to do it just for the purpose for people to learn about this issue. And I've also seen hope in the people that I work with in my film, like educators, social workers, and peer specialists, right? Who show up every day and do their work and very humbly do their work. And I really respect that because there are very patient people. They are living in the system where homelessness is not something that can be easily fixed, and it is a cycle. And so I am really just I have full respect for people who are deeply committed to supporting these homeless youth in ways that are patient and human.
As other, as young people are listening to this, and for other young people that, care about so much about social justice, but they don't know where to start, what would you want them to know?
So I would want them to know that uh, it is very important for young people like us to to read news. I think that's something that is very overlooked because a lot of people that are in my age, they always read news from and get their sources from social media. But I think there is a difference between reading it from social media versus reading it from a reliable source because I recently subscribed to the New York Times. I didn't think that I would actually read it, but I actually like reading. I actually like knowing what's going on around the world and see patterns, see similar patterns and reflect, right? And I think it is very important to be aware of those issues and find something that you're very passionate about, find something that you would be willing to fight for, and uh, use what you have, use what you are good at to spread awareness. For example, for me, filmmaking is a tool for me to spread awareness on social issues. And so it could be speaking up on social media, or it could be reading, writing, like any medium could be fine. I think it's just up to um what you're good at, right? And what matters the most for me is also to stay humble and being willing to learn, open to new experiences, and remembering that small actions really make a big impact.
I stress in the beginning too how I'm such an advocate of student voice, and I'm hoping listeners really are also getting that how we all learn from the youth because you're looking at things through a different lens than I did when I was young. So, this final question that I do have for you, as you think about this project, not only this project, but your journey so far, what does moving forward mean to you right now, not just as a filmmaker, but as a young person trying to make sense of the world?
So right now, moving forward means for me means staying open, open to learning, rejecting stereotypes and assumptions, and to being uncomfortable and to not having all the answers at the same time.
Hmm.
And this project really taught me that the world is complex as it is, and that meaningful change really takes time, patience, and humility. And I think that teamwork really comes to this because a small change that you take action in really does make a big impact. For example, in my film, I emphasized that community is really important, right? Like community is the main drive that creates a big change. So uh, I I talked about how um, donations and giving food and giving money for homeless people are a good it is good and are a good act are good acts, but I think that people needs to uh fund organizations that actually emphasize and prioritize mental health care for
Mm.
homeless people, because that is very important, right? It is not just about where they live, it is also about their mind and their mental health, because that comes so many things before having a stable home, and that is what builds a stable home. And uh it also teaches me how to be grateful, right? And to view to view things in different lenses and to be open to new experiences. So open-mindedness is a very important thing for me to to move forward.
Emma, I have to thank you so much for this conversation and for the courage, thoughtfulness, and the care that you're bringing to this work, and I'm sure many other things ahead of you. You remind us that leadership isn't about having all the answers, but about asking questions, better questions, and
Yes.
listening deeply to the voices that deserve to be heard, which is what you did in this project, and I know you'll continue.
Yes.
Your commitment to ethical storytelling and your youth voice, period, and social justice challenges, it challenges all of us, especially adults, to slow
Yeah.
down and to pay attention and take responsibility of the systems that we've created. To our listeners and to the listeners here, please let this conversation invite you to reflect on whose stories you hear, whose voices you amplify, and how you choose to move forward with intention and hope. So until next time, thank you for listening and for choosing to listen to student voices that deserve to be heard.